Hey there, Emily here at the Movement Clinic, and today you are joining me and my seasonal allergies for a nice little myofascial release class. So, if you're wondering why I sound like this, if I'm sneezing or sniffling, it's spring here in Loretto, and I definitely have some allergies happening. Anyway, moving on. So, for our myofascial release class today, focusing on a few things to help open up the low back and hips. I highly recommend that you have a block or something of this nature, maybe even a pillow. We're going to be using this for our head, so a blanket will do. 2 myofascial release balls or tennis balls, or I don't know, get clever, but something around tennis ball size or lacrosse ball size. And maybe a blanket. This can come in handy just to make things a little more padded and accessible today, or even to lie across your myofascial release tools, whatever those might be, to make it a little bit softer on your body, depending on how tight you are. So grab everything you need and join me. All right, so we're not going to need any of our tools quite yet, but go ahead and get started lying on your back in a Shavasana. So we'll begin as we end in Shavasana. Make sure that your shoulder blades are underneath you and down your back. Soft jaw, gently close the eyes if it feels okay, or maybe soften the gaze. Allow the toes to roll open. Smooth out your breath. Begin to tune into the pressure where the back of your head, your shoulders, upper back possibly meet the mat. The complete release of pressure where the low back begins to curve up towards the ceiling and naturally lift. The pressure where maybe the sacrum or possibly more towards the tailbone and the hips rest on the mat. Anywhere where the backs of the legs meet, the pressure on the heels. And take a moment to notice how the breath moves the ribs and the back of the body, and how that increases or decreases or shifts pressure along the back of the body. Notice here the way that the low back and the hips feel. Notice if there's any tension or even a sense of discomfort lying here in the low back. Maybe the body is speaking to you about its general state right now. I know mine is. And ultimately, allow yourself to arrive in your body in this moment. Just softly and gently taking it all in. Begin to gently bend your knees. Plant your feet about outer hip width distance. Notice how the low back and the orientation of the low back shift. Maybe adjust your hips as I'm going to do to create a more neutral position of the low back. Just allow it to be comfortable. You might keep that soft gaze, or the eyes can remain closed, and become aware of the flat part of your low back, the sacrum, and just start to rock side to side across that. So the legs will move only as much as rocking side to side across the sacrum creates for movement in the legs. And just slowly continue to rock side to side across the sacrum. This is bringing a little bit of hydration to the discs in our low back. So plumping them up, creating space between the vertebrae. You might start to rock even more side to side, so the legs will move even more. You can bring the feet closer or further apart. I'm going a little further apart as the movement gets bigger, so that there's even more pressure across kind of those outer hips or outer glutes. Jaw is soft, neck is soft, eyebrows relaxed. Let go of any unnecessary effort. Wonderful. Now, slowly pause. And I find with this work, it's really helpful to kind of palpate or use my hands, my fingers to touch where I want my myofascial release tools to end up. So I have that connection before that more intense kind of pressure of the weight of my body and gravity pressing down on these tools. So what we're looking for is this flat part of the back, our sacrum that we've been rocking across, is this triangular muscle across our back, or in the middle of our low back, kind of at the top and between our butt cheeks, okay? And what I find helpful is if I kind of rock to one side and feel with my fingers where this bony and very prominent bony spot is, and I start to walk towards my outer hip, it sort of falls off bone and into usually some pretty dense muscular tissue. Or maybe you've got more cushion there, and so you maybe feel a little bit more of that cushiony tissue, which is fine. But we're wanting to not be on bone, we're wanting to kind of come off of the bone into the tissue, and this, what usually is dense muscle tissue, kind of outside of the sacrum. So go ahead and grab your myofascial release tools and grab whatever pillow you're using. So I'm just going to use my block on the lowest setting to kind of keep my neck in a more comfortable position for me. You may or may not need a pillow. And then I'm going to place my myofascial balls on either side of my sacrum. So for me, I like to press into both feet, lift up. You might rock side to side to find it. Really figure out what the best way to come in and out of these positions is for you. And then once you feel that you've kind of managed to get one of those spots, or into a good spot rather, usually there's a lot of stuff going on that's pretty tight up here. So wherever you land will do you some good. But try to get it in that little nook. And then plant feet about hip width distance and start to open the knees out, coming into sort of a butterfly position. Kind of feel that pressure. For some people, this can feel super intense. For some people, this can feel really delicious. But no matter what, notice if you're resisting the resistance. That usually creates for even more intense sensation, right? Which is what the resistance is trying to avoid. So soften around the resistance of your myofascial release tools. Soften the neck, soften the jaw, soften the gaze, or maybe close the eyes again if you feel comfortable doing that. And I invite you to stay here if this feels enough for you, or without lifting off of either one of your balls at all so they don't roll away, you might start to Maybe close the left leg in closer to the right, and you'll notice that there's more pressure on that right hip and ball. And then switch, open out that left knee and start to gently close the right knee in. So I almost get to 90 degrees. I almost get my right knee straight up towards the ceiling, but not quite, because I don't want to lift up off of the ball and have it travel anywhere. So you might kind of gently rock side to side, creating a little more pressure. Or again, stay still. And you might rock to one side and pause for a couple of breaths. And then rock to the other side and pause for a couple of breaths. Really just choosing the pace, the intensity that is useful and valuable to you and your body right now. And really try not to rush the process. I am someone who loves a good dose of immediate gratification. I'm sure you all can identify and relate to that. But when it comes to our bodies and kind of undoing our modern body as it adapts to our modern lives of sitting a lot and kind of standing in ways that are less than ideal or create some more compression, especially in the spot that we're working on, we can't rush, right? We're not going to make it better by doing it harder. So, or longer or faster. And then slowly begin to open both knees out again. So just take a moment here and pause. This sort of supine butterfly position with the legs. Notice if maybe the knees are opened out a little bit wider, or maybe even it feels like they are. And very slowly draw the knees back in together. Separate the feet if they were together. Press down into the feet. Lift the hips. Remove the balls out from underneath you. Keep hold of them just so they don't travel. And let your legs go long to the bottom of the mat. And notice if there's a sense of more pressure with kind of the glutes, the low back, the hips pressing down into the mat. Maybe more of sort of a pancaked feeling, as I call it. Maybe the low back and hips and butt feel wider, like they've released. Good. Now, we're just going to work with one ball or one of these myofascial release tools. So go ahead and get rid of it, or just one of them. And we're going to take one, rebend your knees, plant your feet, and I'm going to start with the right hip so that you can see. But again, palpate first. So there's this bony hip crest kind of in our low waist that is pretty identifiable for most of us. So press on that, kind of identify that in the right hip. And then usually about a palm's width or finger's width distance away, you can find this really hard bony surface that is the top of our thigh bone, right? That usually if we lie on our side on a hard surface rather, we can identify that and feel that pretty quickly. So where we're targeting is the space right between. So if you gently start to walk your fingers towards one another, you're gonna kind of come in on probably some pretty dense, tense, maybe muscular tissue, right? But usually this area is pretty tender, so keep that in mind. Now from here, I like to take my ball once my fingers have found a spot that seems like that might be useful. I'm gonna take my myofascial release ball and kind of press in. All I'm going to start doing is opening out my right leg and maybe starting to roll over the hip a little bit. Okay. So for me, because I do this pretty often, I can actually start to move and stack my legs, okay, in sort of like this twisted position. But if that's not possible, just know that this left leg can kind of open out and lift up to remove a little bit of pressure. Maybe just the right leg is opening out and that's enough for you. And then just find a position that's comfortable for your hands. We're going to be here for about 5 more smooth, deep breaths. Okay, now gently begin to lift out, rolling back onto your back. Take the ball in the hand or your tool in one of your hands, just so again it doesn't roll away. Lengthen your legs long again. And notice if it feels like your right foot is turning out more than the left. And sometimes a lot of people like to look and see, is it? It looks like mine actually is, but really it's just that feeling of release that we want to connect to. And the reality is that maybe my left toes or my right toes turned out more than my left already, and I just hadn't connected to that visually yet. But less than the visual, live in the experience and the sensations of your body. And let's go ahead and do the other side. So take your feet, bend your knees, plant your feet, excuse me. Take your left hand. I'm going to go ahead and switch just so that I stay nice and visible to you while we're finding these positions. But again, take your thumb and find the top of that bony hip crest. And take your pointer and middle finger and find that bony top of your hip or your thigh bone. Walk your fingers together. This is about where we're going to start to find some of that real nice juicy tissue. And then take the myofascial release tool, ball, apple, lime, whatever it is that you were able to find. And start to open the left leg out and roll over and place as much or as little pressure as feels appropriate. And for whatever reason, my left gluteus medius, which is what we're targeting here, is always a bit crankier and more tender than my right. So notice if you're tensing your jaw, soften it. Notice if you're tensing your shoulders or your neck, soften those. See what you can soften around the intensity of the experience. It might just be your thoughts. It might be a sense of physical softening. A few more smooth, deep breaths. And slowly roll onto your back. Grab that ball in one of your hands. Let your legs go long. And notice if you feel that the feet are more symmetrical here, that they're opening out. Maybe you've got some nice sensations, tingling, rushing, or whooshing, feeling. Almost like tracers of sensation from your hips to your toes and the soles of your feet. Excellent. So go ahead, re-bend your knees, plant your feet, and we're gonna need both of our myofascial release tools again. So I'm gonna switch here so I can access both of these. Okay, now I'm gonna show you my low back. And there are these ropey bits of muscle on either side of your spine. And we can connect to these because these are huge muscle masses. And if you walk your thumbs down, you're gonna hit the back of that bony hip crest. So it's that same structure that we were feeling on our sides is the same that we hit here. So we're gonna go just above that and on either side of our spine. Okay, on these big ropey bits of muscle. And how we're gonna come into this is lying on our backs. You can put that cushion or whatever you're using underneath your head. Bend your knees, press into your feet, and start to place your balls on that spot. So to start, it might just be that you're allowing the hips to soften and release. This might be enough for you, and you might choose to just stay. And everybody here, focus on softening neck, jaw, right? These are places that will inadvertently hold tension. It's like another form of resisting the resistance of pressing into these myofascial release tools. So yawn the jaw open and closed. Maybe stick your tongue out. Good. Soften those cheeks, soften those shoulders. And you might choose to stay here, or very slowly draw your belly in for support and begin to draw your right knee in towards your chest. And there's a little bit of pressure as the hips will both naturally need to lift. And then release and soften. And then maybe the left knee and foot lift up towards the chest, hips hover gently, and the pressure intensifies. Maybe keep going one knee at a time, or maybe you float both knees up towards your chest. And again, notice if you're holding any tension in your neck, your shoulders, and your jaw. You might yawn the jaw open really wide, stick your tongue out. Excellent. Now slowly, mindfully, release one foot and then the other, both feet. Press into the feet. Remove the blocks off, or the balls, off to the side. Place them wherever they'll be out of your way. Allow the legs to go long one last time. You can keep the block underneath your head or pillow or cushion, or get rid of it for your Shavasana. And take a moment here and see how this Shavasana feels different from the first one when we started. So after just a few very simple techniques for myofascial release, we can acknowledge the effects that this type of work has, the changes that it makes in our bodies, and really the experience of living in our bodies. And I invite you to stay here as long as it feels valuable. I'll see you next time. Namaste.